Hi, listeners. Thank you once again for joining for the latest episode from Lessons from the Playroom podcast. And today there are a group of amazing clinicians that are here to join me. We're going to be talking about play therapy, but play therapy applied in contexts that aren't necessarily traditional play therapy or in a playroom or even in a strict mental health kind of way. We have child life and medical settings represented. We have equine therapy, animal therapy represented, and we have the world of occupational therapy also represented today. So let me go ahead and introduce my special guests. These three individuals are important people in my world. They are all certified synergetic play therapists and are out in the world doing amazing things. And as I just said, taking play therapy into realms that are beyond the playroom. So I have with us today Cara Smith. So Cara is a certified child life specialist. And not only that, but you work all over the world, Cara, teaching and applying all the amazing things that you know. You have worked in South Africa. You've worked in the Middle East. You're bridging in mindfulness, resiliency building, self-regulation, interpersonal neurobiology, trust-based relational interventions, even yoga into your work in medical settings and the child life world. Cara, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. And then we have Amy Pennington, who is representing the world of occupational therapy. Amy, you work with kids and adults. Also bridging sensory motor interventions, synergetic play therapy, but you also do a lot of education in public schools and with teachers, supporting teachers and the students. So much on neurodiversity, affirming and trauma-informed classrooms and practices. So Amy, thank you for being here today in this conversation.
Yeah.
And then we've got Jacque Maben, who is here representing not only equine psychotherapy, but Gestalt equine psychotherapy. You are also EMDR trained, Jacque. And this was cool. I didn't know that you actually had a ranch with 14 animal co-therapists with you in that. So that is amazing. So you're a science geek, animal lover, parent, etc., and just doing so much to help children and parents. So the three of you, once again, thank you so much for being here. And what I think is a really important conversation to help us all think outside of the box, because it's true that many therapists actually wear more than one hat. And so let's acknowledge the many hats that therapists wear. And let's also acknowledge that play therapy can be applied to more than just the space for play therapy mental health professionals, that there's a place for play in healing in many, many modalities. So let's begin. Let's go back. So Cara, just share a little bit about your work that you do and how you bring play into the world of medical.
So as child life specialists, the interesting piece of what we do is we're actually with children during the stressful event that they're experiencing. So our job is attempting to mitigate some of the negative effects of stress and trauma so that kids can continue to grow and develop in healthy ways. So we use play as the foundation of what we do as child life specialists, but one of the ways we use it is to kind of take away some of the unknown in the hospital environment. So before a child comes to the hospital, they may come and play as the surgeon in a mock operational room so that they can actually play through the process that they're going to experience. Before any sort of procedure, we're doing preparation, which is basically we have all the medical dolls and real or pretend medical equipment where we get to play out what that kid is going to experience. So they have an idea of what will happen to them, but also so that we can make up a plan for what's going to help you with this. How are you going to make it through this experience? What's going to feel safest to you? And then we're also there during that stressful experience, again, using play to help connect kids with what's going on during the procedure, to help give them something else to focus on if that's what they choose, to help with the deep breathing and blowing bubbles to help with deep breaths during the procedure or whatever's happening. And then also there afterwards to help kind of integrate whatever the experience was and process through that experience and play through whatever they were feeling as a response to what happened in the hospital. So we're doing that for big procedures. We're doing that for little procedures. We're doing that in the midst of grief and loss. Anything that you can think of that could have brought a kid to the hospital, we're playing through those experiences. So we were when we first came into the field, they called us play ladies, and everyone was so offended by that title. But then the more I get into SPT, the more I'm like, call me a play lady. Like that's 100% what I do. And I just so much appreciate how play is the foundation of that and how it's a part of everything that we do in the child life world.
Amazing, Cara. Thank you so much. All right, so let's jump over to the world of occupational therapy. So, Amy, share some light there for us. How in the world do you bring play or play therapy aspects into the world of occupational therapy?
So actually, whenever we think about all the different areas of occupation being, what you do to fill your days, play is the occupation of children. So a lot of our different activities and whatnot are based in play. And through SPT, I've been able to really learn more about like them picking their play and me popping little pieces in that help us work on whatever skills that we need to work on. And then, but right now I'm in a school setting where play is often seen as not what we don't want kids doing, but through the different kinds of play um, around those activities, they're finding, how children are more engaged and able to retain the things they're doing. And so there does come that part of educating teachers that while what you see is play, they're still learning, because that is actually how children develop learning skills, is through play.
I have a question, Amy. For those
Mhm.
that aren't really fully familiar with what an occupational therapist does, will you just say like 30 seconds on what does traditional occupational therapy target?
So, occupational therapy targets any area of skills where that somebody might be lacking due to an illness or an injury that is limiting them from fully engaging in the parts of their life that are important to them. So that could be fine motor skills, but it could be some executive functioning skills, and it could be anything from like how to brush your teeth and get dressed in the morning to how to like manage your day, cook a meal, anything that's valuable to you that you find meaning in, that fills and occupies your time during the day. The way I describe it to kids is Miss Amy's job is to look at what you're doing and try to figure out where things get hard, and then see if there's anything that we can do to make it maybe a little less hard.
So even in that, the world of sensory processing, something
Right,
might feel overwhelming, and I can't do the thing because I get
right.
overwhelmed, or yes, my sensory
Yeah.
system is flooded.
That sensory system, and that's one that is often unnoticed. Kids don't realize that that's what's necessarily going on. They know they can't do it, so we put names to it, which is also something I really got from my SPT, is naming those experiences. That isn't something that I got through my traditional OT education, is naming what this feels like for me, and helping them to be able to name what things feel like to them so they can express to others what feels good and what doesn't feel good and what they need and don't need.
Awesome. Okay, great. So let's round this out with Gestalt equine work and working with animals, and then we'll start to have some fun conversation between the three of us. So, Jacque, how do you bring play into the work with horses?
Um, well, I mean, the first piece, and I'll speak more in general with animals. It provides that neuroception of safety right away. So when kiddos come in and they're super anxious, having an animal present, I feel like, they know right away that they're safe because the animal is non-judgmental. They're always congruent. They're authentic. They're themselves. They don't know how not to be. And therefore, because I'm connected with them, then I must be as well. So that just helps in general, getting them in and helping them know that they can just be who they are and work out whatever they need to work out. So obviously if I'm working with a client who's afraid of horses, that's not gonna create that neuroception of safety right away. So I might not choose that, but just depending on where that child is at. And then in terms of, horses specifically, they are master external regulators, just being who they are. So they have this huge electromagnetic field that helps regulate the heart, and it's 5 times stronger and it reaches 30 feet out. So just being in the presence of a horse can help regulate the system. They often will do things like they'll sigh, and I call it their horsey sigh. And so whenever a horse sighs around myself and my clients, then we'll just repeat it because they're trying to tell us, you need to take a deep breath, right? Or they'll roll, they'll lick, they'll yawn. These are all ways that they are helping us regulate ourselves. So that's really beautiful because you can just be out watching, observing the horses and not actually in contact with them. And you already just feel more at peace and a little bit more relaxed and, at a distance. And then there's the grooming and the interacting with them in a closer range, which is really beautiful as well. So that's a lot of the non-direct. And then the Gestalt piece of it plays in nicely with what we do in synergetic play therapy, where it's projected onto whatever's up for the kiddo gets projected onto the horse. And then we work with that. So a lot of times kiddos will say, oh, that horse is being a bully. And so I will name that, I will regulate in that, and we'll, bring up bullying in their own lives. So we won't talk about the horses, and horses actually don't bully necessarily, but I don't talk about that. We just work with what is present in the here and now. So there's that piece. And then, of course I've got the 4 horses. So we have a herd, which the more horses you have present in a herd, the bigger the electromagnetic field. And so you can feel it from quite a distance. But I also have 2 goats. I've got 2 rats, 2 cats, and 2 dogs, and they all have their different gifts. And so whatever that looks like, that's what comes into play. And then often the animals get incorporated into the play. And so whatever the kiddo is working on, the rats are really great at, they're great in many ways, but often kiddos who have a lot of perceived control in their lives, then they are trying to control the rat because they're a lot easier to control than, they're not really, but their perception is they're easier to control than say a horse or a dog or even a cat. And so that part comes into play as well. So we get to work with that.
Jacque, can I just name, thank you for representing rats in a way that is not normally represented, and for shedding a spotlight on rats
Yeah.
have such a bad reputation. So
They do, and that's part of it. They're misunderstood. And
they're
so a lot of times there's
misunderstood.
a parallel story, especially with teens, that they can, they feel misunderstood. So they're,
Beautiful.
yeah, you
Beautiful,
bet.
beautiful.
Love them.
So I want to start to ask some questions where we can start to flow between the three of us. As you are listening to each other, if you have a question if you're curious because you're holding your lens, feel free to ask, and let's just have a little bit of fun with this. So you all referenced synergetic play therapy, which makes sense. That's the training that we all have in common. And there's this underpinning in synergetic play therapy about being an external regulator. And so let's tease that out. So when you think about applying the play into what you're doing, or when you think about synergetic play therapy pieces around being an external, how does that principle apply directly into your work as we're talking about this as trauma integration? How does that show up? And for listeners, in synergetic play therapy, becoming the external regulator is considered to be the primary role of the therapist. So the ability for the therapist or the clinician to be able to self-regulate in order to co-regulate with the child towards the whatever's challenging for trauma integration. So, Cara, how does that show up in your work?
It's honestly been the hugest piece of SPT that has impacted me, and it shows up most clearly when in the midst of a stressful procedure, where you're in the room and something's going on with the child, and there's however many other adults also in that room. The parents are there, the other staff members are there. And there's one incident when I was a brand new child life specialist before I was introduced to this world, where I could literally feel the heat coming from my feet all the way up and just out. And I just exploded in that room because I was not okay with what was happening. Wasn't one of my finest moments. I learned a lot from that, but it's the being able to learn how to be the external regulator in such a high stress environment it's pretty powerful. And I want to tell you a story, not actually about me, but someone who I had taught some of this stuff to. She was covering in the ICU, which is a very high stress environment. I mean, if you've ever walked into a hospital, you immediately feel, right? You feel what's happening in that space. And when you're in these intense environments, you feel it as well. But she went in to do a procedure with this kid, and she doesn't usually work in the ICU. And so when she walked into the room, the staff who was familiar with the other child life specialist says, "Oh, she usually stands right here. She puts the iPad right here." It was like a 3-year-old getting a dressing change, and this child life specialist said, "I'm actually going to try something new today. I'm just going to use me." And everyone's like, "No, she stands right here. She puts the iPad right here." And she's like, I'm just going to try this, guys. Just go with me." And so she gets next to this kid and she locked eyes with a 3-year-old and she just started to breathe. And she said that 3-year-old just eyes on her and they breathed together. And this 3-year-old cried, like, some sigh cries, but the whole time they were locked in and she just breathed and never said anything. And then the staff after that all took a deep breath and they were just like,
What just happened?
And it was like it, and I think that more and more that we're starting to realize we have all these tricks and tools that we use, but to learn how to use myself as the external regulator in those moments has been a game changer in the field of child life for me and for so many people.
So what I just heard you say was that child life specialist became the external regulator so that she didn't have to avoid what was happening. She could be present, even as a 3-year-old, she could be present with herself in the midst of this really scary and uncomfortable experience, but she was still safe in the midst of it. She got that felt sense of safety.
Absolutely. And I think that's been one of the biggest shifts, because oftentimes as a child life specialist, when you walk into the room, the staff's like, "Oh, fix it, make the kid smile again." And it's been becoming that external regulator and being okay with that wide range of emotion has given permission to be like, actually, we're not going to come in and make smiles right now. We're going to come in and connect with sadness, and that's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And that's been a really big shift that I've felt like has deepened the work that I've been able to do as a child life specialist.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Amy, external regulator in occupational therapy.
So whenever I've worked in a clinic setting or a home health setting, a lot of times with sensory processing, as I'm figuring out what's going on, certain things are really uncomfortable. Again, we use the play as much as we can. Things are more engageable with when it is fun. But naming and working through that myself it's been very beneficial for me. I, in my current setting, usually am trying to be an external regulator in a room with multiple people.
Mhm.
So I usually have a teacher who's upset with a kid that's upset with the teacher, and other kids around. Um, as Cara was saying, I try not to use a lot of things because things can set a wave off going the other direction. It's interesting just to, I've had a couple of experiences where I've worked on myself being regulated in that space and noticed kids who are not kids that I'm working with doing the things that I'm doing. And in all honesty, that was even harder because then I was like, oh my gosh, somebody is like taking from this. But it's a real balance when you have so many different people in that area, and what that is. So just like trying to be as um, connected to myself. And I will admit that before this work, I had a tendency to regulate myself out of the situation. I was less likely to let those feelings come up and take over me, like Cara was saying, because I just did not let them exist at all, which really separates you from the people that you're trying to connect with.
Mhm.
Very confused as like why it doesn't work, because I'm not present,
Mhm.
and I'm not in what they're in. And so if I can be in what they're in and stay connected to myself through breath, through movement, we do lots of movement, and those kind of things, then we tend to connect better,
Um,
take more.
I want to add something, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Mhm,
This has just been an observation, as you probably know, as probably all three of
mhm,
you know. You've heard me say many times, I love working with occupational therapists. I think occupational therapy is such an amazing addition to the traditional play therapy process, particularly since we're talking so much about, what's happening in the development of the child
mhm,
and nervous
mhm,
system states and all of that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I have noticed, being with kids in session while they're getting occupational therapy supports, is that when the occupational therapist is able to co-regulate with the child, because sometimes some of the things that the occupational therapist is asking the child to do are uncomfortable,
mhm,
right? We're working on uncomfortable
mhm,
things, right? We're trying to expand our range. Sometimes it can be physically uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be emotionally uncomfortable. And I have noticed that when the occupational therapist can co-regulate with the child through that, that the child's able to stay with whatever it is a little bit longer or not
mhm.
get as emotionally flooded. Does that, that's been my observation. Is that, would you say that?
Yes, I mean, yeah, a lot of times what we're doing is uncomfortable, and there's always that like when somebody comes in and you're starting and building the rapport and doing the things that they really usually feel good about that they can do, and then when we start pushing a little bit to the things that are harder, you get often more shut down or refusal.
Yeah.
And that's where I say if I can co-regulate, but then also like I can regulate and co-regulate with the child, and giving them that opportunity to really do the play that they're doing. Um, 90% of the bad sessions I've had is when I said, this is what we're doing. But if I can follow their play,
Yeah.
then we're still doing their thing. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do it this way. Say we're doing something with a ball and I'm going to reach out to the side instead of catching right here. And if my balance isn't good, reaching out to the side feels dangerous. And so you naturally get that activation of the nervous system. But in that play, and the play actually helps me regulate as well. Following their play helps me as much as it helps them.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Jacque, the question popped in my head because of your story about the horses being amazing external regulators. So in addition to that, will you share even a little bit about the therapist's role in that, or what else comes to mind when you think about being an external regulator with animals?
Yeah, it's both. It's and both. Like sometimes in a session I get activated and I'm kind of lose myself a little bit, and the animals will come in and like remind me that I'm here. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but one of my cats came and crawled along the chair and hopped into my lap, and sometimes will claw me and I'm like, okay, yes, I'm here. Thank you. So that helps me, and then I can be aware of what's going on, and then I can intentionally become the external regulator. So it's kind of like the circular piece of being, being co-regulated by the horses or the cats or whoever we're with in that moment, and then reminding me, oh, hey, I'm here, and then regulating that way. And it also just helps me keep going. Like, I can't imagine doing this work without the animals, because they help ground me and keep me present. Like, I'm here, and I'm also paying attention to what they're saying, because my job is to keep them safe as well. Like that, it's, both. Like, they're a neuroception of safety, but also I could be their neuroception of safety in times.
I'm hearing you describe that animals have this additional piece of, not only are they part of the play, but they're also your co-therapist.
Yes.
And
Yes. We
so
call them our co-therapists for
call
sure.
them your co-therapist.
Yep.
Perfect, right? And
Yep.
so whether you need help, someone, right? I'm going to call the animals a someone, right? Someone needs to co-regulate with you to support you, or they're helping co-regulate the child, but they're, you're describing this amazing extra support in the environment.
Yes. And then especially with horses, I mean, they are just always kind of regulating. They are prey animals, so they're always hypervigilant, but it's beautiful to watch them, because they'll be eating and then they take off and run. And then seconds later, they're eating, because they allow themselves to move the energy. And so just watching that piece, it's like a reminder that, yes, there is danger out in the world, or, we're feeling this perceived challenge. And yet, if we allow it to move, then we can go right back to being present and feeling connected. So it's a beautiful reminder, just that is always there for us.
So what you're saying is we need animals in the medical settings, and we need animals in the school settings as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Amy, do you want to share?
Yeah, as I was just listening to Jacque, I'm like, like just when you think of animals and their innate nature of being in tune with the environment around them, it's like a great metric for when things change, to help us to tune into that. And then also it's like they let us know when, and they are part of the thing that helps us to regulate.
Yes. Yes. It's very circular.
It is. It seems very interconnected and lovely. I'm jealous.
Well, let's actually have some curiosity. So Jacque has this extra element that she's able to
Mhm.
bring in. So Cara and Amy, what's your extra element? Right? What's your piece? I know you're like, Lisa, what a question. But we all there, right? There's brilliance in each one of the settings. So what's an extra piece?
I would say in mine, it is opportunities to move our bodies in ways that aren't traditionally looked at as this is how you would move your body. We do upside downs and flipping around and spinning and those kind of things. And that it's unusual, so it brings an extra level of attention to it. And yeah, it's a lot of that unusual exploratory things and new experiences that a lot of my kids have not either been able to experience before, or it hasn't been presented in a way that felt safe for them to engage in before.
I imagine sometimes too, Amy, there might be even an innate impulse in the kid, but it's not socially acceptable to
Yeah.
move in that way or to go upside down or to whatever it is.
Yes, there's a lot of like especially like in the school setting, training out of what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior and movement. And I heard an OT who I don't remember where I read it the other day, who talked about how we talk about kids going outside to get their energy out, but it's really about putting in their body what their body needs to feel settled and complete. So, and upside down is not usually something that your teachers smile upon. Um, so yeah, being able to do our stuff in any position that feels comfortable for us, I would say is definitely a flex I have.
Awesome. Okay, so in animal assisted work and in the medical setting, more body movements. Right? Okay.
Totally.
Yeah. So I'll use Amy's, what's your flex?
Man, I think finding this probably isn't a flex, but I think something unique to child life is our ability to put words to the unspeakable. And that's done in a number of ways, right? It's teaching a 5-year-old what cancer is in a way that they understand it, right? By making blood out of glitter and, whatever else that you're putting together so they can learn about leukemia, or, giving families words to speak to their kids to let them know that their sibling has died, or whatever it is that we're doing. I think that's something unique, and taking all that big medical jargon and making it developmentally appropriate for whatever age the child is, and doing that through hands-on play, right? Like that's really how the kids learn is, can I do surgery to this doll? Can I do a burn treatment so I understand what that's going to look like? Can we take out the appendix and explore the appendix and see what that means? And stuff that, a lot of times families are scared to speak those truths to their children, but when you can do it through play, it takes away some of that fear. And also gives kids language to be able to talk about things you'd have no idea that a 5-year-old would be able to learn and know about, but they're able to because of that play.
I'm going to say that's a huge flex, Cara. In the world of play therapy, there's so much thought that you don't speak directly to what's going on, right? There's so much about you really just use the play as the language. And there are even some play therapy schools of thought where you don't ask questions, right? You don't make whatever's happening explicit. You don't dialogue with the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old or the 5-year-old. And I'm not saying that as like a rule. I'm just saying that most play therapists aren't trained in. And so here's an interesting thing that I hear. It's important to talk to a child about whatever it is in an age appropriate way. Where's the class on what the age appropriate way is? And what I'm hearing you say is that child life specialists are brilliant at the age appropriate way. And in doing so, it's not even just dialogue, it's bringing in play as part of the age appropriate way. So that's a huge flex. Huge. Yes.
Well, and when you were talking, I just thought, wow, that's a superpower. Like that is it's a perceived challenge for me to do what you're doing. And that just came to mind is superpower.
Mm-hmm. Superpower.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't this cool that we have this underpinning of, what it means to be an external regulator? We also have other underpinnings in how we facilitate a play process and what it takes for a child to heal. We can get into that a little bit more here. But even so, we're taking these play therapy principles, specifically from synergetic play therapy, but every play therapy model has its sort of own principles. And we're taking them and we're applying them into these 3 other ways, at least in this conversation. I don't know. I kind of think it's magical to really think about there's this connected point, but then each one of you actually get to be really unique in your own expression of how you are as a clinician in a way that's truly meaningful for you, that doesn't take away from the healing that you're doing with a child. I think that's really, really beautiful. 3 perspectives or 3 pathways. At the end of the day, it's the same goal. Is that catching y'all's attention at all as we're having this conversation? It's really cool.
Well, it feels like it's healing for not only the child, but for us as the practitioner. I've heard that from the other speakers as well. Just that's, as the child heals, I heal, or as the animal heals, I heal, and vice versa. It's this beautiful way of looking at it. It's not one-sided. It's very two-sided.
Yes, Amy.
Well, and then tying in with Cara's superpower on, we exist in a world where like verbal expression is kind of the norm, what you're expected to do. And so like the other half of my job, other than just working on expanding those, the window of tolerance of my kids with some of those sensory things, is being able for adults to be able to understand to some degree what that child's experience is like in the world, and why what they're doing is necessary for them. Because all of the kids that I work with are kids who have like an identified disability, that a lot of people don't understand. I take very seriously that kind of role of trying to create environments that are more welcoming and inclusive for those kids. And then with Cara, like whenever I'm working with the kid and able to give them that language, then they're able to speak to their own experiences to the adults in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. So one of the other pieces that I'm hearing that where there's similarities and differences. So let's have this be the next part of our conversation here as we start to tie us together, is the play itself. So what I'm hearing from all 3 of you on some level is that sometimes there are more traditional types of play, like toys, that are being used. Other times we're expanding the definition of play to include movement, to include different experiences with the body, and then also just to include relational dynamics. That play also exists just in relational dynamics. And I'm loving that because sometimes in play therapy, it's almost like I'm not doing play therapy unless I'm in a room full of toys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's expand that out. what if we're in a part of the world where we don't have a room full of toys?
Mhm.
And as we know, there are many parts of the world where this idea of a room full of toys doesn't even make sense. That's not even their primary mode of play. They're, we're dancing, we're singing, we're moving, we're making, we're creating, we're playing in mud, we're this, and that's really the play. And so let's talk about play itself. So I want you to be thinking about what are the actual forms of play itself that are unique, or maybe don't have to be unique, but that are really part of where you focus your work. So, Cara, you were talking about there's very literal use of play where we're actually making something that looks like, blood, or we're actually having the child, I'm guessing, with a medical kit, and we're actually pretending to do the surgery. What else shows up when you think about play under the umbrella of child life?
My latest revelation, and it actually came from your recent podcast with that young man that wanted to speak.
Yes.
And I don't know why I'd never thought of this before, but now as I'm playing with my kids who have medical diagnoses, I am shocked at how they're showing me how they feel. And I never had used play in that way before, especially our kids with chronic pain who nobody believes and, just want someone to listen to them. I and it's been through sand, which I'm yeah, that's a little bit limited how you can use sand in a hospital setting, depending on, infection control. But having kids, explore the sand and recognizing that this little boy without a colon was teaching me what it feels like to have a colon that's made out of silicone. And I never would have realized that unless you'd had that podcast. And I was like, why have I not been using play I help play to help kids understand the procedure and to help the kids understand the medical thing, but I haven't used it as a way for them to communicate with me how their body is feeling. And that's my next wave of like, okay, child life specialist, this is something and maybe all the other people listening are like, Cara, we've been doing that forever, but I haven't thought of it in that way. And I just think that that's pretty powerful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Listeners, the podcast that Cara just referred to is the podcast where I am interviewing I want to call him a young man, but he's not a young man. I met him when he was 8, but I believe he's in his 20s at the time that I was doing the podcast recording. But he's with his father, and he identifies as being part of the autism spectrum, and it's his beautiful story and journey of how he identifies with that label. So that's the podcast, everyone, to go and check out. Okay, so that's how you're starting to conceptualize and think about the play in a new way. Amy, how does play literally show up for you as an occupational therapist?
I do a lot of the creative. We do a lot on fine motor, and a lot of times it's pushed really hard, like just writing, which no one really loves to do. So we do as much creative stuff with clay, with paper mache, with building, with drawing, with painting. You get sensory aspects in there too, but using your hands in different ways. And some of those have showed me bigger, oh my gosh, how did I miss what you were telling me? Situations out of drawing, painting, modeling with clay and those kind of things. To the point where I now actually recommend with my kids when they need to take a break. Some need a sensory break in the sense of it's a big movement break, but I break it now into a rest break, a movement break, or a creative break, because some of my kids need to do that more creative thing to shift more than they need a movement thing based on their own needs.
Great. So you're bringing in the creative arts in addition to creative movement as part of the play that you use in the OT world. Awesome. All right, Jacque, what about you? How are you bringing play?
Well, when you watch animals, they play. They play. We have goats that play, and you know, they play differently than the way we play, but then we can add those pieces in, watching them play. It almost gives permission. And I work a lot with adults as well, using the principles of SPT. And it's like giving them permission to play. Like, we don't have to always be so serious. And watching them be joyful. We just had Mama Squirrel have, well, she didn't just give birth. The baby squirrels are just now old enough where they're starting to explore, and just we'll go out there and watch them, and they're learning how to jump from, one tree branch to another. Sometimes they fall, and it's like, our instinct is to go help them, and they get back up and they run and they chase. And so just bringing all those components in is just joyful to watch. And that therapy can be joyful as well, like exploring that part. And then also I've got a humongous sand tray out there. So we definitely get into the dirt and the sand, and the horses absolutely love to roll in the mud. And there's a lot of it right now, a lot of mud. A lot of mud. And it's so interesting because kids are like, oh my gosh, they're so dirty, we got to clean them. And then, so, okay, let's do that. And then they'll go out and roll, and it's like, oh my gosh, we just cleaned you, you're rolling. But they do it in such a joyful way. It's like, this is what we do. And so it's just, they model to us humans like how to enjoy life. So it's just every
in
day.
a freeing kind of a way is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting too, as we start to find up a wrapping point, is as play therapists, sometimes we're so focused on play for trauma integration.
Mm-hmm.
And what about the play components that aren't necessarily because we're focused on integrating a trauma? What about the play components that are just helping us feel what it feels like to be alive?
Mm-hmm.
And how important that part of play also is. And I know that emerges in all of our contexts, but you're highlighting it so beautifully right now, Jacque.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to zoom out for a moment and just kind of recap 3 completely different areas of life or places for intervention. Yet this beautiful common thread amongst the 3 of you, and helping us see how you can take something that is rooted in play therapy, and you can take the principles and you really can apply it into other areas of life with kids where the foundation and focus is still trauma healing, family healing, identity healing, medical healing, relational healing, all of the healings. So thank you, all 3 of you, first of all, for being yourselves, for doing what you love in the way that it's most meaningful to you, in the context that's most meaningful for you. And thank you for helping us expand our thinking about what play therapy can actually look like. It doesn't have to be in a room with 4 walls and a lot of miniatures and symbols and toys. I mean, it can, but it doesn't have to be. It really can go beyond that setting. So thank you so much, Cara and Amy and Jacque, for your wisdom and knowledge today.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Listeners, my hope is that if you are more of a traditional play therapist, that this conversation just helped you think a little bit bigger possibility of how play therapy can be applied. My guess is individuals where they're applying play therapy into other contexts. So hopefully this also got you curious about them, what they do. Maybe it'll invite conversation between you and your colleagues at a different, deeper level. Maybe they have something that they can share with you that you might want to bring into your work, or vice versa. And for those of you that are out there in the world applying play therapy into other settings, awesome, 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 awesome. I hope that this podcast gave a little bit of a voice for you in the context of play therapy and acknowledges you and what you're doing out in the world. So, listeners, wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing out there in the world, however you're applying play therapy out there in the world, thank you for what you do and take care of yourself. You are the most important toy in whatever room that you are in or outdoor space. Until next time, everyone.